Okay, it's 6 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. I'll wait for Tabby to take her seat and for Stan to do likewise. I'm delighted to say that after struggling last time with only Stan, Matt and myself, we have a full complement tonight. So thanks all for coming. And welcome to the Cheltenham Borough Council Audit, Compliance and Governance Committee meeting being held on Wednesday the 17th of April. My name is Councillor Adrian Bamford and I'm the chair of the committee. This meeting is being recorded by the council for live broadcast on its YouTube channel and for training purposes. If there are any breaks in transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until any issues are resolved. Can I ask everyone to speak clearly when addressing the meeting and that officers introduce themselves when they speak? As I mentioned earlier, so far we have no apologies. Graham Beale will be joining us shortly. Has anybody got any declarations of interest against any of these items? I'll take that as a no and move straight on to item 3.
Chair.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
Yes, there are various references to Publica in the paperwork. I perhaps ought to put on record that I'm, at this moment, a non-exec director thereof. Thank you.
Right. So on to the minutes of the last meeting that was held on the 19th of March. There's only Stan and Matt who can really comment on these, and myself, and I've made my comments. So anything from Stan or Matt, or any concerns about what we've drafted there? If not, I'll sign them off. Okay, I'll do that then. Thank you very much. Then I'll move on to item 4, which is public and member questions. None have been received on this occasion, so we can go straight on to item 5. And there's 2 items from Lucy from SWAT this evening, and if we can start off with the first one, which is the plan for 24/5, and page 3 of the report talks about plan for 3/4, but I think you probably meant 4/5. Okay, thanks, Lucy. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As you've alluded to, this is the draft audit plan for 24/25. It comes to the committee for approval, and it's just a summary of the work that we intend to carry out for this coming financial year. And it's been drafted in consultation with yourself as members, officers, the team and Horizon Scanning. So happy to take any questions or any further comments, Chair.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Over to members. Have you got any questions on this draft plan? David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if we can fit this in, but I'll try and explain something that I think we could do with looking at across the council if we can, which is our compliance with the public sector equality duty. So there's a nice article in the July 2021 Journal of Licensing called "Councils Need to Wake Up to Their Public Sector Equality Duty Responsibilities." And it talks about case law of Brown and Bracking. One of the key things is the public sector equality duty has to be exercised in substance with rigour and with an open mind. It is not a question of ticking boxes. While there is no duty to make express reference to the regard paid in the relevant duty, reference to it and the relevant criteria reduces the scope for argument. And it also goes on to say it is good practice for a decision maker to keep records demonstrating consideration of the duty. The reason I raise this is multiple. So in next year's licensing schedule, there are two proposed licensing reviews of policy, one of which is the Licensing Act 2003 policy, which is for regulated entertainment, the sale of alcohol, etc. And the other one is the sexual entertainment venue policy. and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council were judicially reviewed successfully for failing to do a public sector equality duty assessment properly for their one of those. I also separately have concerns that if you read all of our planning reports that go to planning committee, the public sector equality duty statement of all of the reports is the same boilerplate. To my mind, that doesn't strike me as being done on a per application basis. And given there are probably a whole host of other things, having something on there about public sector equality duty compliance across the council, but maybe with a focus on those two things, would seem to be prudent to try and avoid costs of a successful judicial review, because the writing is there on the wall that things are not quite working in other authorities. There are concerns about planning, which I'm trying to highlight with planning directly. But I think having internal audit look at that across the board to make sure that everyone, that's councillors and officers, understand what we're meant to do, would seem a really, really good thing to do if that's possible. Thank you, Chair.
So how would you see that fitting in with the risk assessment, which kind of forms the basis for selecting the items? Do you see it as fitting in as a sort of generic over all of those issues? Because we do, when a report comes to committee, there is always a section, I'm thinking, about any report coming to any committee. I think there is some section. There is, okay. So, but go on, David.
Sorry, there is. But I think it's the quality of that and making sure that, I mean, as I said, I would like it to make sure that we understand it for licensing. I think having an independent set of reviews on that. But I also think planning might benefit from it. And if there are particularly contentious cabinet reports, they would too. Again, another example of where an authority has got this wrong. Gloucestershire County Council tried to close its libraries. They were successfully judicially reviewed. They've had to learn how to do this assessment process. And I think it would be better if this council learned from others' mistakes rather than having to pay someone's legal costs, and also learn from its own mistakes. If we can short-circuit that, I think that would be really good. There are a lot of items out there, and I think it's not necessarily too difficult. It's in terms of where it fits in. You can look at one of the planning policy. I think it says we will look at planning at some point in here, and that might be where it can fit in. Is that one of the
yeah.
Part of the plan? Yeah. So, as I say, it's something that we can. I think we can look into it, but I just think it's, given the financial climate, I'm really keen for us to make sure we do this right. And that we understand the risks, because other councils have been caught out. And I think proactively saying, can someone else look at this and just make sure we're doing it right with an independent view seems really important to avoid unnecessary costs if we can avoid that.
Okay, so before I go over to Lucy and possibly Paul on this one, is it your concern that whenever audit looks at something, they should take this more into account than they currently do, or is it that you want effectively a standalone audit of across the council issues relating to equality?
I think it's when we're making decisions. We know that there are some that are high risk of challenge, SEV policy being one. We know, well, I feel that there are some that we probably aren't doing as well as we should. And I'm sure that Cabinet have got some decisions in the forward plan where that independent review would look at it. So it's not everything the council does, because I don't think that's viable. It's trying to do a risk assessed, these things we probably need just an external eye cast on it to make sure that it's that we think we've done the best effort we can, and someone independently looking at it with a constructively critical eye to try and de-risk us from challenge. I've highlighted those areas. I would imagine the Cabinet have other ideas as to, contentious things we might do where there's a policy decision. We just need to show we've done this. And I think somewhere in the audit process, making sure this happens is probably quite important. I don't want to be too prescriptive to the internal audit as to how they do that, because, it's working this out, but there we go. People may disagree. I just look at it as trying to save us money.
So, okay, I'll first of all bring forward just to say I think what David's getting to there is a part retrospective, part prospective look at these things. I think it'd be very difficult to audit anything that's prospective, personally, but I'll let Paul and then Lucy comment on that.
Okay, so I think there is a lot of work already commencing in this area through our monitoring officer, and so I certainly wouldn't want to replicate that in another forum. I think the best way to take this forward, bearing in mind we're at the beginning of the cycle, so we've got 12 months to fulfil this audit. Doesn't need to be sort of signed and sealed today, and clearly I think Lucy has come here in the past and said that we want to work agile and if things need to have a different focus. So my request, Councillor, would be if you could almost on half a page put the sort of audit brief as you would see. We can then take it into the internal corporate officer working group, make sure that there's no duplication there, and then formally put something forward to the next committee, which I believe is in July.
Happy to do that, thank you.
Lucy, do you want to add anything to that?
No, that sounds good to me, Chair. Thank you.
Right. In that case, I will throw it open further for any other comments on the plan for 24/5 that we've got before us today. Okay, well, I'll make a couple of brief comments. Firstly, the core areas are the core areas, and I understand why all of those are there. This is the first time I've actually seen a prospective plan. I'm amazed how much there is in there, and I will be extremely impressed if you manage to cover all that ground. But obviously, I'm not going to suggest you take anything out. I'm particularly keen, on a personal level, to see the items on climate change, carbon reduction, biodiversity, and environmental legislation, because I haven't seen too much of that in the last year. And I thought I'd just offer Tabby the opportunity to have any thoughts on that, or just even to say that she's very glad to see it. I'm not quite sure which. I'll pass over to Tabby.
Thank you. So I did actually have a couple of thoughts about this. I really welcome the recommendations about is it okay to ask about the homelessness deposit loan scheme? Because I think that's a really, really interesting idea. I was just wondering if I could ask if Martin Stacey's request to undertake when housing options are transferred across the CBC with the homelessness loan deposit scheme, just having a look at the updated proposed internal audit plan anyway. Is that going to include provisions made for people seeking asylum as well? Because there's been a massive increase in people getting their residence approved, but then they have around 28 days to find a home, and they're basically just not equipped to do that effectively because they're not allowed to study or work while they're in the process of seeking asylum. So there's this significant disconnect. I was just wondering if there was going to be inclusion of that measure. I was also wondering a little bit with the switch from analogue to digital. I was reading with, I think one of the swap audits guidance was that a lot of services, like including parking meters, they're currently on 3G, I think maybe 2 or 3G kind of provision. So I assume that this is probably going to be including upgrading them so that they're actually, effectively covered, and we're not going to have blackouts of parking meters or any sort of essential infrastructure like that. Okay, that's really cool. Sort of about climate specifically, I'm guessing that the climate mitigation measures are also going to be included in this, because it was quite exciting in the recent overview and scrutiny committee just talking about the flooding risks, and I'm assuming there's going to be a fairly joined up approach in terms of flooding monitoring, just the fact that we do have, you know, hillsides, we have like the Tewkesbury floodplain, just knowing that we have that kind of holistic joined up approach, because it's also quite an emotive subject. I kind of feel like audit can sometimes be looking at things in a slightly intangible way, and I guess like I'd be really interested in making sure that we're centering expert guidance in the kind of work that we're doing. Like, I really appreciate how objective audit can be in these sorts of measures, but I know that like the situation is changing so much. I appreciated the fact that you've mentioned the local authorities are facing this unprecedented pace of change. And if we can predict things as accurately as possible, I think like from all measures, I just wanted to be reassured as to, you know, how we're actually engaging with kind of experts in the field of climate change and potential mitigation strategies, if that's okay. Sorry, I feel like I'm waffling.
Thanks, Tabby. So I think what you're asking, Lucy, there is to comment a little bit further, perhaps on those climate change audits. And I appreciate it's at a very outline stage at this stage, but anything else you might be able to add? And also on the two, are you talking about the two on the next stage, the homelessness loan deposit scheme and the preparedness for switch from analogue to digital? Those are the other two that you'd like Lucy to just perhaps add a little bit more tonight, and possibly liaise with you when the plan's getting firmer, or bring something back to this committee. Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your questions and points. Happy to include the people seeking asylum into the homelessness audit, and that will happen when the 2P has happened for CBH to come over to Cheltenham, and we'll liaise with Martin Stacey with that audit. The digital, analogue to digital, we will try to identify every piece of equipment that's currently analogue, and then we'll find out what's happening with that going through to digital, and we'll probably be working with, I know he's typing frantically behind me, but John will have some input into that audit as well from an IT perspective. And the climate audits, we have done those at our partner councils, so what we're going to do is replicate those for Cheltenham. So what we'd like to do with the operational audit is go to the service areas and say, what do you know about carbon reduction? What are you doing to support the council and the pledges it's made in the reduction of its carbon, which in our other audits came up with some really interesting results in that service areas weren't very good. We'll also be looking at the targets and how the council are moving towards achieving those targets. I'm not sure how we're going to do that piece of work yet, but it's there. And similarly with carbon reduction, that might be looking at the greenhouse gas emission figures that have to be published and just making sure they're going in the right direction.
Did you have thoughts specifically on climate mitigation? Because we're already beginning to see the impacts of climate change happening now.
I hadn't, but I can do now. But you're right about the flooding as well, because there was that was discussed at a meeting I went to last week. Was that a governance group, Paul? Did we talk about flood mitigation? Some councils have got funds, haven't they, for it? Is Cheltenham one of those? Ah. But I will include it.
I should go to Dubai. They had 5.5 inches of rain last night. Thanks for that. I think it would be helpful. I know how high on the agenda it is for both my group and for Tabby's group. Perhaps when you've got a little bit more detail on those climate change and biodiversity audits, that perhaps the three of us could get together outside of this meeting and consider whether actually something needs to come to the committee or be discussed in those groups. Would that be okay? Thanks. Right. Any more questions on this item, or can we move on to item 6? Right, let's move on to that then, and it's Lucy again, and this is the progress report for the items that we would have discussed at this time last year, with Paul as the chair.
Thank you, Chair. This is the progress report. It gives you an update of the work the internal audit team have completed since the last meeting of this committee. We've completed 2 audits this time. I think you had quite a few last time. So you've got a grant income report and you've got use of waivers. We continue to follow up all the agreed actions, and since we drafted this report, 2 of the overdue agreed actions have now been completed, so we can close the second one in red, which is 2992. That's now been actioned, as has the bank reconciliation agreed action. So those 2 will be removed next time.
Those just working in black and white.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Rows 2 and 3 on the table, on page 45.
Oh, right, okay.
So 2992 and 3100.
You yell those numbers again?
2992 and 3100.
Are those the ID numbers you're talking about on page 45?
Yeah, the AP ID, the very left,
AP,
the very
that's
left-hand
the ID,
column.
right. Say it again.
It's row 2 and row 3.
Row 2, okay. 299, yeah, well, I'm
Yeah.
with you. I've got it. Right, okay. Yes, so reading the script. Sorry, reading the text on 2992, it looked as if it was nearly done at
Yes.
that stage, and you're
Yeah,
saying
those
it's
2 are now
now,
complete.
now
so we can close
closed.
those.
and the review of the spend scale. That's brilliant, okay. So by and large on that page, we're pretty much up to date, aren't we?
Yes, definitely.
Perhaps we need a revised time scale 3 for item 424 there, as we are past the 12th of the 31st
Yeah,
of
our
December.
system doesn't allow for any more time scales.
Okay.
But
Minor
yes,
point.
hopefully we'll have cleared that one off by the time we come to the next committee. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Right. David, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, there's there's some good information in the audits that we've currently had, and obviously the prioritised recommendations are being progressed. So that's really good. Thank you for that. In terms of App ID 424, which is the top row, the built environment, local enforcement plan hasn't been reviewed. Can I make a suggestion through the chair that if this hasn't been sorted out by the time of the next audit committee, that we invite the relevant director and cabinet member to attend audit to answer questions about this, because this recommendation came forward in 2020-2021 and had a timescale of delivery in July 2021. It then got moved to April 2022 and then to December 2023. The last update was 5 months ago, and this just seems to be perennially being kicked down the road, kicking the can down the road. And I know for my constituents, and I would imagine for other people's constituents, planning enforcement is a concern. And I think we need to, if this isn't on the forward plan dealt with by the next committee or by the publication date for the next committee, then we should invite, as I say, the cabinet member and the relevant director to come and tell us what resource is going to be put onto this, because it does seem a bit disrespectful to the internal audit if something is left for however many years this has been left for without being resolved. And it is a matter that is of concern to everyone's constituents. If planning enforcement isn't happening and our processes are however out of date, then I think we need to actually invite those who can make this done here to answer questions from Audit Committee. And maybe that will put some put a rocket in the right place, as it were, because I think we need to do this. We need to get this one cleared. Thanks.
I agree, yes. I think it is it would be good time with the new council in place, and we've got 3 months till July. I mean, I'm aware of progress in this area, but we've also had some regress as well at times. It's been something that's come to the planning committee, and it would certainly be good to have a look in July where we are on this one, and hopefully it's something that we can try and put to bed around that time. Okay, thanks. Anything else from anybody else? Paul, to you.
Yes, I share the concerns about the item in red, not for want of trying when I was sitting in your chair to progress this, but it's symptomatic of a wider problem, I think. Planning enforcement, as has been said, is very important, but I'm not aware that anybody receives a report, be it monthly, annually or whatever, on planning enforcement. Certainly, as the member of the planning committee, we don't, because we just exist to deal with individual applications. And I'm not quite sure where there is any scrutiny of the elements of planning, you know, the policies and the processes. And possibly this is something to put on yours and Tabby's agenda, because the previous regime, Councillor Payne and I used to have conversations about potential overlaps and gaps. And at the moment, I think taking the scrutiny of planning enforcement doesn't seem to be, well, it couldn't be, could it? Otherwise we wouldn't be 4 years in and nothing's happened. At least I don't think so.
Well, yes, I think it's a very good point. I would like it to be added, if possible, to the agenda for O&S, although I think that's potentially after we've looked at the current situation more fully. And O&S need to look at it in more in terms of KPIs, comparing us with other authorities. But I'd ideally like them to do that once we've developed our own system as far as we can. Is that okay, Tabby?
Yeah, I think now would be a really good time for it, actually, because I know that the CBC climate team are actually having a look at planning issues in relation to heritage buildings and sort of solar installation arrays and things like that. So, you know, like the fact that there's obviously some, you know, some parallels going on. I think that there are lots of people who are interested in like home solar, and they are restricted by the planning designations that we currently have. But there are resources and case studies available from other councils who are facing similar issues with heritage properties. I think it could be quite good to be a bit more responsive in this way. So I'd like to see if like maybe our strategic planning, like just as you've said, just kind of having a bit of a joined up approach, because if planning committee by itself are kind of looking at singular applications, you'll probably be seeing patterns arising that if we don't have a facility to kind of try and address root causes. I do remember that there was a survey that came out about a year ago about the planning process, and I remember completing it, but I don't think I've heard any feedback from it, so it'd be really useful if we've had any consultations carried out, especially with the public, and sort of see what data there is and sort of see what may already be on the table for us to take a look at. I think I'd quite value, I love doing surveys, but I really, really love seeing where they go and what's implemented as a result of them. So I kind of feel like there's probably quite a lot going on here that we could draw together as part of like an overarching plan, really.
Okay, so I don't think there'll ever be a report to the planning committee as such. I think this committee would be the right one to look at it in July. And I think you were saying there potentially you would take it on O&S as well, potentially after that. Okay, right. Okay, any other comments on this item? Can I just finally then ask if the 3 items where it looks as if there's a draft report doing the rounds now on page 38 in relation to SIL and Section 106 agreements, is that likely to come here in July, do we think?
Yes, it will do, because 106 is the seal and accounts payable were finalised last week.
Excellent. Okay. I won't ask you any.
What we will say, yes, we will do, because 106 is the seal and accounts payable were finalised last week. And the,
Okay.
The other thing I've just spotted on that plan, Chair, is the Audit Committee effectiveness. And I think a little while ago I sent out surveys for the Audit Committee so we could do a self-assessment on yourselves. But I'm assuming it's probably now not a good time if you're up for elections. I'm guessing.
If you want to know what I really think, now's a good time.
Do you want to do that in private session?
So, I seem to remember something as well. Responses to that?
I think I may have had one.
All right. Gosh, I can't remember whether I've responded or not. How terrible. I would have done if I'd, yeah. Could you perhaps sending it around again? Because we do need, that's something we need to sort out urgently. And, you know, we've also got to consider the independent members here as well. And we do need that annual self-assessment sorted out and reported here. That's fantastic. Just very finally on this item, there's one other thing. In relation to grant income, which is really grant expenditure, isn't it? From our point of view. Anyway, there are 3 priority 2 items there, but as I understand it, they are either imminently being concluded or will be concluded relatively shortly and signed off. Can I confirm that that's how you see them?
At the moment, they've got an end date of September 24 on them.
Okay.
So we'll be bringing an update on progress.
Not till September.
We'll bring an update on progress in July.
Okay.
But hopefully we'll have them, they'll be closed off by September.
Okay, so you're hopeful that is the you're not concerned at the situation at the moment, other than that you've reported them as issues. Yeah.
We only know what we know, Chair, so it'll be when we go and speak to Richard.
Right, can we move then on to item 7, which I think is it Emma's item? It is Emma's item, yes. This is a routine 6-monthly report, is that right? Yeah. Okay, over to you to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's the usual report from my service area about the activities that we're undertaking. At 2.6, I've outlined some of the focus areas for this coming year. So one of those is support work with grant schemes, because all councils are now administering so many more different schemes, etc. So to support any of the teams that are doing that, we're going to look with Audit to work on a toolkit which will give tips, hints, information about verification and more verification, which is my thing. We want to make sure the right people are applying and providing the right information. So rather than us having to attend or feed in, because that's becoming unmanageable, because there's just so many different things going on all the time, to give assurance and just to give the teams something to work from. We'll build that in, and I think we'll extend that to things like crowdfunding, voucher schemes, things where there's a risk, and we just want to make sure that people are thinking about verification and making sure the money goes to the right people, and then spend it on what they said they would spend it on. So that is in the work plan. Also, polygamous working, agile working, cost of living crisis, that's become a risk. So we just want to do some additional working around making sure that people have additional employment have declared it in the right way. And this isn't about people having extra jobs or voluntary work. That's obviously allowable if you declare it, but this is about people who have several full-time contracts and are therefore not fulfilling their obligations to the individual councils. So yeah, that's going on. There'll also be a bit more of a focus on your council tax support scheme. So we'll be actively reviewing those claims. So going back to a bit of an old-fashioned, looking at claims, making sure they're correct, when did people get in touch, etc. In terms of 3.3, we did get the funding from the OPCC, so that's really good. That will support the build of the web page for the MAF group, which is the police, us, trading standards, the NHS fraud team, all the councils, etc. So building that website for residents, workers, visitors to Gloucestershire to be able to go and look at fraud risks, things to avoid, high-risk scams that are going on or specific things that are going on, and in what area, because of course we can drill down to things that are happening in particular parts of the county through the statistics that come through from Action Fraud, but also it's supported by victim support, so that if you are a victim of fraud, there's also advice there on how you can get support, etc. So it's collaborative, and it covers all the different angles. In terms of your NFI matches, so 3.5, we're pretty up to date with that for Cheltenham. We nearly finished all the review of this year's data sets as well, so the results on that will be with you in your September report. 3.9 details the general enforcement activity that we undertake, and obviously you're talking about planning enforcement, but that is something we can support with. So if we get referrals relating to heritage offences, trees, buildings, etc., then obviously we can support the team to undertake that. We prosecute that generally. So yes, details of outcomes regarding the enforcement support, and then at 3.10 your update with regarding the work that we do for CBH to look after the housing stock. And there's obviously a piece of work that I'm doing with the transfer in to make sure that that work continues, and where we can support the teams that are moving back, they can undertake checks, that we just continue to deliver that assurance work, etc. And also continue to get properties back that have been abandoned. From 3.13 onwards, it's your annual update on our surveillance activity, so RIPA and IPA information. We are going to refresh, do a quick refresher email round to everybody to say, do you want some up-to-date training again, just as a reminder, because it's a pretty dry subject area, but it's a really important one. And we've done a summary, so for the staff, as a kind of, again, quick reference, what type of surveillance activity they have to think about, what's proportionate, what they could do instead. And I'm also, my intention is to send that round to all members, just for reference and information for you. In terms of numbers, we've continued to undertake overt activity, but that process is exactly the same as if it was RIPA, so we make sure everybody is considering they're not trespassing when they put cameras up, it's proportionate, the stuff they're doing, it's the right type of activity, we're not filming things we shouldn't be, children's playgrounds, for example, etc. So yes, all of that's going on. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Emma. Any questions from members? Councillor Willingham.
Not so much a question, but just to highlight some things in there which I think are really valuable for what the council is doing. So you've got the 168,000 in loss avoidance from 3 abandoned properties and a right to, and a withdrawn right to buy application. So if you think about the impact of that on people in Cheltenham who need housing, that's quite a saving to the public purse. There's also all of the work getting more council tax revenue, so that's nearly £20,000. And then the work supporting someone on the Protection from Eviction Act, which I guess is dealing with someone that's tried to unlawfully evict someone. And again, if you think about the impact of that on not just the person but also the councils then potentially having to rehouse someone, this is really important work, obviously for the public purse, but also for the victims of things like that, and the council taxpayer who ultimately loses out if we're defrauded. So I think it's just worth really drawing that out of how important that is, and the work that it does, because hopefully it will get reported somewhere in the media. People will realise that actually, if you do this in Cheltenham, there's a very good chance you will be caught, and either you will be stopped doing it or you will be prosecuted, and it will cost you more in the long term. So it's just a thank you.
Yes, and I'd certainly like to echo Councillor Willingham's comments there. It is incredibly valuable, and it's, well, I can remember working as a local government auditor and doing some things not entirely dissimilar, and thinking that, you know, it was very much a backwater in all those years ago. I'm also pleased to see that you're sitting next to Lucy, because there is almost an overlap to some extent, isn't it? Which isn't to say that we don't need you both working on in the areas you're working in. And as we reflected earlier, Lucy's got a very, very broad programme already. So I think it's excellent that we're focusing on this area. Councillor McCloskey.
Yeah, I'd just like to add my appreciation as well. I'd noticed the 168,000. I think that was absolute vital that we managed to do that. I was interested in the last bullet point of 3.9. The individual received a fine of £108 and was ordered to pay £85 in costs. This was the individual pleading guilty to offences relating to council tax reduction scheme. What happened to the money that the council didn't get? Because it's fine having him fined and him paying costs, but it's not actually got our money back.
So that's the figure that says your increased council tax revenue. So where we investigate wrongly claimed council tax support, it's just rebuild. So somebody's council tax is reduced by X because they get the reduction scheme. So once we come along and go, that was incorrect, the council tax is reinstated effectively and they're rebuild. And then it becomes part of the normal recovery, and so some are obviously recovered quicker than others, because if it's a large amount of money, that could go on for some considerable time.
I'm kind of assumed there was a good news thing to that. I just wondered as well, a more general point, no doubt you've taken an interest in the proceedings at the Post Office Horizon scandal. I wondered whether you'd sort of noted any sort of lessons to avoid for the future for your own role.
Have good investigators that are actually trained, and not people that have watched an episode of Line of Duty and think they can do it overnight. I think that's probably my learning, and that's, as you all know from sitting here and listening to me, I'm rather passionate that people think this is something you can just do, and actually it's a profession and it's a skill set and it's an awful lot of training. Interviewing people under caution there is a process, and you've got to do it properly. Investigating crime is a process, and you have to do it properly. Disclosure to get to court is a process, and you have to do it properly. So I think my pedant ways are probably the best thing that helps that, because I'm a bit vicious in we have to be trained properly, we have to be doing things properly. And if there's any element of doubt and it doesn't meet the evidential or the public interest test, that a case doesn't go to court. I'm not quite sure how they managed to squeeze so many through, if I'm truly honest on that evidence.
Well, they appear to have the power of prosecution and adjudication. It's extraordinary, yes. Any other comments? No? Right. Just if I could, a couple of quick ones from me. Appendix 2, it's effectively the sort of, it's the where we've got to with the 23-4 plan and the 24-5 plan rolled into one, isn't it, really? Which is fine. I think it sort of doesn't do it justice just to call it the 23-4 work plan. It's a kind of just a thought.
No, and I think it's a thought that you've actually captured across the partnership. So what we've done this year is, rather than having like a work plan and smushing everything together, we've got almost more like a service delivery plan. So there's separation between what policies we look after for you, when they were approved, when they're next up for review. A fraud risk and governance area. So what are we doing about our fraud risk strategy? What fraud risk work streams are going on? And then equally, what one-off pieces of operational proactive drives are we doing, and how will they be delivered? So in the future, you won't be getting something like this. You'll be getting information, me writing more effectively in the report. So where we deliver a piece of work, we can then talk to you about that piece of work, and that's delivered. The policies kind of speak for themselves, because you get to see all of our policies where I review them. So again, you'll know when they've been through committee, when they've been reviewed, etc. So yeah, it's rather than making it a bit of an aide de memoire of what we do, so that if I decided to go and live in Barbados, then somebody else could pick it up and say, what's the team responsible for and what's their delivery. So we've expanded it and made it a bit more meaningful this year, so it's a bit more helpful but members won't see any of this anymore. You'll just get much more information within the reports.
I think you'd be lucky on council wages. Thanks for that, yes. And I it's very useful having the aid memoir, as you say. So, but I can see how it might evolve. On Appendix 1, this is just an observation which you might wish to comment on. They're things that will be there forever, aren't they, really? I mean, so it's difficult to use that as a working document in terms of risk management, even though I understand the assessments and that they're valid. But in terms of managing the risks, it's almost a separate report, or just my thoughts on the subject.
No, it's another good point. So as a consequence, because you're absolutely right, everybody knows fraud is the most prevalent crime in the UK now. So saying that it's a risk to the authority doesn't really help you mitigate it. So what we've done is we have the fraud risk strategy, which came to you a couple of years ago. And then part of that was a couple of government checklists, which we're working through to then report back to corporate management at each of the sites to say, what do we do well, what could be improved upon, and what other lines need to be worked on. And then we are also working on specific service area fraud risk registers. So it's relatable to the staff that are in that department. So rather than having an overarching fraud activity, which is so different if you're a procurement officer to a revenues officer, and they can't necessarily relate and don't need to relate to one another, we're developing a revenues and benefits fraud risk register, an HR one and a procurement one as the higher risk areas, and housing. And then we'll work with the different service leads for those areas. What do we do to mitigate? What are the risks? What can we work on, etc., etc. And each of the partner councils, each council will have their own set of fraud risk registers. So rather than just this generic, we all know it's a risk, it becomes a lot more meaningful and a lot more relatable for the individual staff that we've got, because it just is such a wide scope.
That's lovely. I think that'd be great if we could have some in subsequent 6 monthly reports and some reflections on those more detailed areas. Yeah. Right, let's move on to item 8, which is it's Gemma, the review of draft accounting policies for 23-4, and this is, whilst it was a very handy aid memoir for me, for brushing up on what I last read 30 years ago, it wasn't hugely exciting in the sense that there were not a lot of changes, shall we say. So I'm looking around here. Do you think they've all read every word? I'm not sure. Anyway, I did read a good few pages, and as I see it, there's very little change, is what you're saying.
Oh, that side. Thanks, Chair. That was nice review of my job there. So obviously last time we were here, we presented we closed down the final value for money report for the 21-22 accounts. So that certificate has now been published. We are fully closed now on the website for 21-22. Still waiting on what the outcome of the consultation on and the discussions with Grant Thornton on the 22-23 backstop will be. Meanwhile, obviously, we're now into 23-24 close down, with the draft accounts required to be published on the website on our website by the end of May. So obviously, you will see these draft accounting policies again as part of that document, and then again when we bring the final audited accounts. But yes, they were fully reviewed as part of the 21-22 audit. We've not picked up any changes in the code of practice or any accounting policies. The only change we're expecting will be in the 24-25 accounts, and that will be IS 16 on leases. But that's likely to have a pretty minimal impact on us. So just presented here for comment, just as a sort of off the back of a recommendation from the auditors that it was good practice, which I agree. So just to note and take any comments or any questions on the 23-24 close down and accounts process.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. I didn't mean to suggest that there wasn't a huge amount of work there, by the way. But I'm slightly surprised to hear that we still don't know for sure about the backstop. Is that? Yeah, we presumably we're 99% sure, are we?
So at the moment, the proposal is that the backstop for all accounts up to 22-23, so of which we only have 22-23 in that set, need to be audited and the final accounts published and signed off by the end of September.
So we categorically know that is the situation.
But we don't know necessarily whether at the moment that will apply to us. So we're still in dialogue with Grant Thornton on that.
Okay. Any questions for Gemma? Councillor Willingham.
Thank you very much. So I've got just two questions. Given the changes that are happening with Cheltenham Borough Homes being brought back into the organisation, and obviously all of the financial changes that may entail. So the first question is, how, if at all, does that change stuff? Does that just mean that your team has to incorporate CBH's finance team and just do the accounts for all of that, or is there more to it? That's or is there anything we should be checking on how this process works, I guess, because it's obviously quite a big change. So that's the first question.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is for the 23-24 accounts. So obviously nothing fundamentally has changed in that accounting period. We did have discussions with Grant Thornton at the time that the cabinet decision was taken in October, and we've likewise had discussions with Bishop's Fleming about what requirements and changes might be needed for 23-24. Fundamentally, nothing changes. We still have to produce a set of accounts for Cheltenham Borough Homes. We still have to produce our statement of accounts, which includes the HRA and the group, because obviously we've also got the airport then in those group accounts. But what we will need to include in the relevant sections is various disclosures about what is going on, because obviously for a reader of the accounts, an avid reader of the accounts, we need to be clear and transparent. What that then means for the 24-25 accounts will be a bit more technical, I think.
So, okay, so watch this space. Brilliant, thank you. The second question is, in the previous one or two of the previous accounts, we had and I'm trying to. You'll forgive me if I get this wrong. I'm not a trained accountant, so if I get quite the technical language wrong, we had, I think it was capital receipts recognised against MRP, which upset the external auditors to some extent. I think that's a polite way of putting it. Is that captured in that document to say that we're not supposed to do that, or we are allowed to do that, or there's government rules around that? Because I think for those of us that are not economists or accountants, that was pretty difficult to get our heads around. And I think if there's clarity about whether we are or aren't allowed to do it going forward, that either avoids the problem or makes it clear that we are allowed to do that. And as I say, if I've not quite represented that properly, but I think it was we had money from capital and we a one-off sale of something, and we used that to pay against MRP for the money we pay against interest. And I'll say that out loud. You can clarify that if I've got it wrong for anyone watching the webcast, because it seems quite complicated to me.
Yeah, you were absolutely right. So what we had, I think we're going back now to the 2021 statement of accounts and the audit findings report, where we had applied capital receipts to repay debt. And you're correct, and we had that discussion in the committee at the time about the view of external audit. Of that, as a result of that, we went away, actioned their recommendation, which was to review our approach, which we did. That's reflected now in our updated MRP policy, which was approved by, which is required to be approved by council each year. So that comes to the March Council. So that was reviewed and updated for the 21-22 accounts, which we've had signed off. And then we've then repeated the same practice in 22-23. I'm trying to get this right. And 23-24 is our last year of doing that. So from 24-25 onwards, we are now only repaying debt for where we have loans. So if there's a capital receipt coming in from, say, at the moment, Cheltenham Borough Homes, we use that then to repay our debt that we took out to fund that loan. So that's all outlined in the MRP policy, and that was signed off and updated as part of the 21-22 accounts.
Not quite sure I understood that, but I can't understand why that doesn't reduce debt. It does reduce debt, doesn't it? Anyway, that's a subject for another, well, outside the meeting. Right, okay, any more questions for Gemma on the accounting policies? There being none, I think, like the other three reports, I probably should have said this, we're noting them rather than voting on them tonight. So I think that brings us on to the item 9, which is the items for the next meeting and subsequent meetings. Well, yeah, the work programme, sorry. Yeah. We haven't got the first two items this time. So they'll presumably carry forward to July, yeah? I'm taking silence as assent. And just noting that it will be quite a heavy meeting if we have all of those items. Do you think that's too many, or do you think we can cope with that, Paul? Okay, any comments from anybody on the work plan, or can we, or sorry, it's not the right phrase for it. What's the right phrase for it again? Work plan, okay, sorry. Work plan, right. Any concerns about our work plan? I see not, so let's move on. I think that brings us neatly to item 10, which is, when I get back to my script, any other item the chairman determines to be urgent or requires a decision. Well, I have no such items, but I am aware that we are going to move into the next section of the meeting where the public are excluded. So I presume that's where we end the transmission. Is that right, Julia? I have to read the resolution. Okie dokie. Okay, right. So under the Local Government Act 1972, we're moving into this section on exempt information. The committee is recommended to approve the following resolution, that in accordance with section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining agenda items, as it is likely that, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, If members of the public are present, there will be disclosed to them exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 and 7, part 1, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, namely paragraph 3, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Paragraph 7, information relating to any action taken or to be taken in connection with the prevention, investigation or prosecution of crime. Could I ask you to vote by a show of hands that you confirm that we're happy to move on? Graham, are you happy?